A warm welcome from here at Hydepark with Indiviri Amwatha. Now, although it is with Indiviri Amwatha, today I'm taking her seat temporarily, and I assure you she will be joining you next week onwards. And today on the program, we have former Central Bank Governor Ajith Nivard Cabraal joining us. Hello.
Hello.
Right. Let's get cracking. Let's talk about something more recent. Let's start the show with something very recent. Recently at a forum, you in fact pointed out that the Sri Lankan economy requires, and these are your words, a shock treatment plan, and you outlined 12 pointers there. I'm very curious about the choice of words here, shock treatment.
Yeah, what I said was that we need a benign shock. Maybe some of your guys must have missed that part.
Yes, it was a benign shock.
A benign shock. A benign shock is different to a shock, but a benign shock is also necessary to revive patients that we normally do. If you do find a patient whose heart is stopped or who needs to be resuscitated, you got to give them a new fillip, a new kind of a push, which will make them get up. So today Sri Lanka's economy is right in the doldrums. It is flat on its nose, and we need to make it work again. We need to get it kick-started again. So to do that, you need to give it a benign shock, and that's what I have meant, and that's the 12 points that I had raised, because I believe unless you do give it a push and you give it a new momentum, we will not be able to get it to do all what we need to do later on. So first you have to revive, and to revive you need to give it that benign shock, and once that is effectively working, you will probably see that the rest of the initiatives that we have proposed can be worked out quite well.
Now, you also said the Sri Lankan economy is a patient in serious trouble.
Yes, it is. You look at the parameters. Our debt to GDP has now gone nearly 100%. Our growth is at 1.6%. Our businesses are failing. Our NPLs of the banks are rising. You find that the reserves are dwindling. The rupee has got messed up. It's at 183 now. Interest rates are double what I had left when I was the governor. So if you look at every parameter, every single indicator of the Sri Lankan economy, we see that those are in deep trouble. And that's why if you need to take it out of that situation, you need to give it a new momentum. And a new momentum comes with certain initiatives that would make it work towards that end. So that's why I think I use that word, that it is a patient. It is definitely a patient. I would even go further and say it is like a patient who is coming to hospital who has got knocked down by a bus. So now you need to revive the patient and get him to become active again, because if you talk to any businessman, they'll probably tell you, look, my business is bad, my name is in the crib, I cannot borrow anymore, my staff cannot be paid salaries. I know of certain companies where they take turns to have the staff. 50% of the staff come to work on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Another 50% come on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And they get 50% of their pay. But that's the best that they could do. So when you get into a situation like that, where the economy is contracting, where you don't see light at the end of the tunnel, that's a dangerous situation. And that's the situation that we are in today. And that's why you need to give it a hard shove, a hard push for it to blossom again. And that has to be done. If you do that only, you will find that Sri Lanka's businesses can blossom again, move out into the rest of the world, and then take their positions.
Right. Now, I have to ask you this. I mean, this is, if I didn't, it would be leaving out the elephant in the room. Now, one of the biggest accusations leveled against you and the previous regime is that Sri Lanka went on to amass the greatest debt. And in fact, the allegation suggests that Sri Lanka fell into the debt trap, as it were, during the previous regime under which you were the central bank governor. How do you respond?
That's a canard that has been spread by no less a person than the current prime minister, who was talking about a debt trap, until he got into one himself. Now, if you take the debt of any country or any person, there are three factors. One is the quantum of debt. How much is your debt? And the second, when you talk about it, is the interest rate that you have to pay. That is your servicing cost. And the third is the length of your debt. Now, if you take Sri Lanka in 2005, when we took over, we found that the debt level of the country was as high as 91%. And that is, mind you, in the central bank reports, all the numbers are there. Sri Lanka was at a level of 91% of its income as far as its debt was concerned. Then the time to maturity of the debt was only about 3 years. The third was that we were servicing the debt at a range of around 6% per annum. Now, that was the situation that we took over. That time, actually, we were in a debt trap. Thereafter, when we left in 2014 end, the debt to GDP level had come down to 71%. That is, mind you, after all the massive construction work that was done, as well as the rehabilitation work that was done after the end of the war, and after spending for the war, and after dealing with all the infrastructure development that you have seen right across the country. The second part, the debt servicing cost, had come down to 4.2%. So that was a manageable rate, and that meant that we were able to pay 4.2% and service our debt, which was quite reasonable because our interest rates that showed had come down. The third was the time to maturity of our total debt, and that had gone up to nearly 7 years. So we were comfortable as far as the period is concerned. We had shrunk the debt to GDP ratio so that our debt level was quite comfortable compared to the total GDP that had grown, and the interest rates were sound. Today, what is the situation? Today, we find that the debt to GDP has gone up to as much as 100%. Number two, the debt servicing is now at 6% because they have borrowed at higher interest rates, each year they are borrowing at higher rates. Third, they have still managed to keep the average time to maturity at the same level that we had, but the other two are now crushing the debt situation in the country. So I think if we are talking about a debt trap, now is the time to talk about it. We are in a debt trap now, and in order to get out of that, I must tell you that as well, we have to quickly ensure that our GDP grows, that the income of the country grows. We have to see that that grows, and that's one of the points that I mentioned with regard to the benign shocks that we are going to do, because we need to get the businesses active again so that we will grow the economy fast. And number two, we got to shrink the interest rates because we have borrowed and borrowed and borrowed, and people who are lending know. So when you are lending, if the person who is borrowing has shown some recklessness, they jack up the rates. So we need to show some discipline, we need to show some order, and once we do that, we are quite confident that we'll be able to bring it down. So the short answer after that part is no, we were not in a debt trap. We are now in a debt trap, and that is a canard that has been spread by no less a person than the Prime Minister, and that's pretty bad for himself because he found it after when he has mentioned that so many times that people started believing it, and then he found it difficult to borrow himself without paying higher interest rates.
Now, I'm not taking the government side or your side, I'm just playing devil's
actually, I'm
advocate
also telling the situation, not the government side or my side.
Yes,
I'm
I
telling the
understand.
factual position.
But one of the things which I highlighted, in fact, our growth rate kept being revised down. In fact, it was revised down several times. And I suppose there were difficulties in the agri-sector. And of course, the Easter tax played a part as well. Now, these are not things that we're just hurling out. These are not just things the government's just hurling out. These are the things told by the IMF. And also the 52-day government, that too had an impact. This is the view of the IMF, right, back in October. So how do you respond to that? I mean, do they have a basis for those comments?
See, it's like this. You got to have an economic policy that can work under any circumstances. During our time also, we had enough of shocks. If you remember, we had the world's biggest economic downturn. We had the banks crashing all over the world. We had US having a recession. We had a food crisis. We had oil going up to $145 per barrel. We had a war in our country. Did you hear us complaining? Did you hear us coming and saying, look, we cannot do this or we cannot do that because something else happening in the rest of the world? If you are the manager of the economy or if you are running the country, it is your business to ensure that all those factors are taken into consideration and proceed forward. This government, every day it's either the Easter shock or something else, or US is having some problem, or there is some global downturn. You see, these are very easy to give. Every day there's something happening in the world. If you really want to fish it out, you have a newsroom, go around and have a look. You'll find there are enough of things to tell if you want to find excuses. But that's not what is needed. You have put people in charge to do it. So who did the Easter shock, Easter Sunday? Was it the people who are running a boutique or your TV channel? No. It is the government's own inefficiency that led to that. So each one of these things, you can see that there is a final link to the inefficiencies and the mismanagement of this government. So if after that has happened, they're coming and giving that as an excuse, I think that's not fair. That's not right by the people of this country. You are there, the government, I'm talking about the government, they need to make sure that they take all those factors into consideration. Look at the external scenario and take the decisions accordingly. So they let the rupee slide from 131 to 182. Was it before the Easter Sunday or after the Easter Sunday? That was before. So how did that happen? Interest rates went up to 12% AWPLR, average weighted prime lending rate, from 6% during our time to 12%. Was that because of the Easter Sunday shock? No. Businesses had already started to collapse by that time. It is the tourism sector that got the shock after the Easter Sunday. But the rest of the businesses were already in trouble. If you take all the reports that came out, you would have found that the IMF as well as the central bank report showed that the NPLs, that is the non-performing loans of the banks, were rising tremendously. That is not because people were willing to just come and not pay their loans. They couldn't pay their loans. They didn't have enough business. People didn't have enough purchasing power to come and make their acquisitions or make their purchases. So when that happens, you see a downturn, you see a contraction of the economy, which is what was happening, which is what is happening even now. So when that happens, it's very easy to come up and give some excuse saying something happened in Argentina or something else happened in Wales or some other story like that. That is not what is required. Every day, this government comes up and gives some excuse or the other. So I think that must stop. Well, hopefully that will stop soon.
I understand what you're saying. I understand, but it sounds like now you're making blanket criticism, as it were, of the current government. And talking of inefficiencies, there was some during your tenure as well. Now, for an example, as promised, export economy was not delivered. I mean, don't you see that as a failing of some sort as well?
Right. Excellent question. What do you mean by exports? One is export of goods, the other is export of services. Now, during our period, you found that the export of goods had risen right up to $11 billion. This government, in the 4 years that they have already given figures, they still couldn't match that. And I'm telling that very, very responsibly. If you take the 4 years average of this government's export earnings, it is less than our last year. All right? Then the services. We had 400 billion only with regard to tourism. That had gone up to 2 billion. We had 200 million with regard to IT services. That had gone up to 1 billion. We had tea only at 900 million. That had gone up to 1,100 million. So every single item went up. Because our economy grew so fast, they came up with this story that the exports to GDP was falling. Well, that happens in any country where the growth is faster and because there is a lot of economic activity taking shape. And exports, mind you, is not only the exports of goods that we need to talk about. If you take the tourism sector, that's also export. If you take the IT sector, export. If you take the BPOs, export. Because people are paying money from outside in dollars or in other foreign currency to the country. Now, these are all factors that sometimes have been missed out by so many people. So I think we had not failed. In fact, we had a plus as far as the balance of payments is concerned. Finally, it is your bottom line. So bottom line was always plus. But in this government, this is not a blanket criticism. This is the factual situation. If anyone can challenge those facts, they can do that. So I'm giving a factual position with regard to the performance of this government. So this government has to take responsibility. If it was good, they would have said, "No, we are done well." Look at the growth. What is the growth that they announced last week? 1.6%. And that also, I think, is a little exaggerated. It wouldn't
Exaggeration
be exaggerated.
How so?
Have you show me the companies that have had big growth? Tell me which ones had done better than last year. I don't think you can tell that.
So have you actually sought out these figures?
If you look at all the figures of the company, because we are taking one measure. I'm not only saying that that is the measure that you'd see. All the companies that are in the stock exchange, their earnings in the first and second quarters of this year have reduced. If you take the NPLs, that is the non-performing loans of people who are struggling to pay their loans, they are rising, which means they are not doing well either, because if you're doing well, you won't be getting into the crib and not paying your loans. So those are indicators that things are not so good. But let them say 1.6% in order to comfort themselves, fair enough. You have to understand the actual situation. Then only you can do the treatment. That's why I am proposing that we have some benign shocks, as I mentioned to you, because we need to get this out of this mess. And that's why we need to have people getting energized to do their businesses again. With the current taxes, people can't do business. You double the taxes. When you double the taxes, do you know of a single person who says, "I'm better off now, I'm doing very well, I'm paying less taxes when my income has risen"? No, because of the fact that they are being taxed heavily, their interest rates are high, they cannot meet their loan payments, because a chap who was having a housing loan during our time would have been paying 9 or 10% as interest. Today they are paying 17%. So on ₹1,000,000, that's 70,000 rupees addition. How many gas cylinders can that buy? How many gallons of petrol can you pump? So you got to understand it in that holistic scenario. So that is why these are all factors that we need to consider. And if you take all that into consideration, if you look at the rupee, how much it buys, how many rupees you got to give in order to get $1, then you start thinking again. So I think people do that, and sometimes they don't know why it's happening, but they know it's happening. So I'm trying to give a reasoning for that situation.
You touched on something very interesting, which is tax, and we will return to this routine discussion right after this break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We are here at Hydepark with former Central Bank Governor Ajith Nivard Cabraal. Now, Mr. Cabraal, it was a riveting discussion before we touched on some key issues, and one of the things that we want to talk about is, in fact, economic reforms. Now, there are a set of policies which are being mooted by the respective candidates, let's just say, right? And the faction maybe you support have put forward some key reforms. What are they, and what changes are they intended to make? And in addition to that, what do you propose?
Yeah, we actually need to get the economy up and running again. Now that's a twofold exercise. One is in the short term, we need to get companies energized, we need to get businesses energized, we need to get entrepreneurs energized. So to do that, we need to ensure that our macro fundamentals become benign again. That means, to put it very bluntly, our interest rates have to come down, our rupee has to become stable and manageable, our debt situation has to be more manageable, with the total banks also having greater flexibility to do their business. We need to have foreign investment coming in. All that needs to happen in the short term, in a very quick time, in order to get out of the situation that we are in. The second is more long term. What is our overall vision? Where do we go? How do we ensure that there is jobs for the children of our country? Now, to do that, we need to have investment coming in. Unless your investment platform is providing the necessary impetus for that, you will probably not find people coming and investing. Now, when you go to any country, you want to see whether the country is stable, whether it has a good situation as far as the defense and well as the law and order is concerned. Are there bombs going off? They want to see that. That we have to assure people that our situation is in the right place. Number two, that our macro fundamentals are in the right place. Number three, that we have got the infrastructure going in order for people to make investments. Nobody wants to come to a country where the roads are not good, where there is no electricity, where there is no power, where there is no water or anything like that. So you got to ensure that all those facilities work. So our basic structure of the economic platform would be to get all those factors into place. The second is, what are the thrust areas? Now we see tourism as one of the key thrust areas, and we are going to support that. We are also going to support education, and presidential candidate Gotabaya Rajapaksa has already mentioned that he will devote a lot of energy as well as resources towards improving the educational structure so that people can have better jobs. They will be better educated, they will be better trained, they will be better qualified, so that they can do better things in life as well as for the country and for themselves. The third part is, we got to ensure that there is a good entrepreneurial set, that people will be able to do business better, that they are trained, that they have an idea about what to do business. Sometimes people don't know what their income is and what their turnover is. So if you don't know that, sometimes you can make mistakes. So you got to give them a basic training on those matters. So that's also being planned, and I'm sure that will also help. Then we have a lot of minerals as well as the country is rich in other resources. We need to ensure that we make proper use of those and that there is proper value addition coming through those. So all these factors you would find need to be done together. That's why there will be thrust for agriculture, for industries as well as services, which will take Sri Lanka forward in all those areas. And I think once we get that into shape, we'll find that there is a large amount of foreign investment that will come into our country. There are people who are very keen to invest in the infrastructure of the country, to invest in businesses in our country, particularly the tourism sector. So we'll have to encourage that. Now, to do that, we have to see that the laws with regard to the agreements that we have with foreign countries, that these are also in our favor. I saw recently the Prime Minister was saying that the free trade agreement with Singapore has been hailed by the Singaporeans. We don't want the Singaporeans to hail it. We want the Sri Lankans to hail it. What's the use of a free trade agreement which is liked by the people who are abroad only, and the Sri Lankan people are very upset about? That's not, does it make sense to anyone? So first of all, you got to satisfy the people of our country, and they must think it's a good deal for them. If you don't do that, then there's something radically wrong somewhere.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Now, in terms of the business community, given what you say, I mean, like, why should they put their faith in? Why should they buy into what you have, what you preach? Let's just say in the run-up to the polls. Why should they? Why should they trust you?
Number one, we have performed. If you think about Sri Lanka in 2005, it was a $24 billion economy. By 2014, it had risen to a $79 billion economy, the fastest ever growth in our history since the independence. Up to independence, we had, for 57 years, we had grown only up to $24 billion. And in the 9 years, we had grown from 24 billion to 79 billion. We had average growth of 6.4%. We had foreign direct investment coming into the country. Our infrastructure underwent a complete transformation. We had new highways, we had new roads, we had carpeted roads. There was a lot of people who were willing to put money down and invest. Large number of people invested. The large number of people made a lot of investments into the country. Huge number of new investors came in to the country. They invested. That is because they had faith. I don't want to tell the name, one of the largest banks in the world coming and telling us that they were contemplating shifting their regional headquarters from Hong Kong to Sri Lanka at that time in 2014. That was the mood. That was the mood of the country. Marriotts were coming. Shangri-La came. So why would anyone come like that if they didn't have faith?
Right, now let's touch on some of the mega projects that which were worked off during the previous regime. Let's start off with something like Port City. Right. Now, there were some issues pertaining to that as well. They said, like, the investments weren't exactly well clear. There were some issues surrounding them. There is a massive grey area about it. For an example, the environmental issue, the assessment report. Allegedly, that was not obtained, and the project was given the green light. And with the Hambantota port, equally, there were concerns. So, could you please shed some light on this?
Thank you. It's a very useful question. Now, they came up with the story that there was no environmental permission granted and so on. And after stopping the project for 1 year, what did they do? Did they change it? No, they just went on with the same way. So obviously it was just a ploy that they wanted to show off to the country that this was a project that didn't take place, and they just stopped it for no reason. But what it did was, the Chinese investors got very, very finicky. Rest of the world got very upset, because even American investors that I know who had met with me said that they were very upset that the country's government unilaterally stopped a project of this nature. That went very badly for us. Now, what did it tell us finally? That they had to pay a $143 million fine, which they compensated the Chinese company by giving more land. That is how they worked it out, so that they didn't have to pay the money, but they gave value in kind. What did it do? It only stopped the investment flow into the country. Now, take the port. They said that the port was a debt trap, that it had led Sri Lanka to the debt trap. Do you know that it was only 2% of the total debt of our country that was being that was there for the port? Only 2%. So could 2% have made such a huge impact? And even so, when they got the money after selling the port, what did they do? Did they settle the debt? No. They took it to pay salaries. So it was just a total set of lies, which they continue to say one after another, and after some time they are quiet about it. Now, did the debt trap go away? Did the debt to GDP ratio fall from 71% to 60% as a result of selling the port? No. It has gone up from 71% to 100% now. So the whole set of lies is now falling like a pack of cards. So sooner or later, we would have, if we go on like this, we'll find that we are having a serious issue on our hands, because none of the stories that they said held water, and we are seeing one after another the stories becoming exposed as the lies that they have been. So it's a very sad situation. We shouldn't be happy about it. Actually, I'm very, very upset that this has happened, because we know where the economy was going. We know it was going at 7%, 8% growth. We know that the GDP was increasing. We know that sooner or later the total trickle-down effect would have taken place, and more people would have come out of the poverty line. But that was not to be, and today we are back in the same situation where a one presidential candidate is offering slippers to people. Can you imagine? I'll give you a pair of slippers.
Well, we won't talk about slippers, but we will talk about China's involvement in everything right after this break. So do join us after it. Welcome back indeed. Now, today we are joined by former Central Bank Governor Ajith Nivard Cabraal here at Hydepark. Now, we were talking about Sri Lanka's mega infrastructure projects and various other projects, in fact, on top of that during the former regime. Now, want to touch on China's involvement in all of this?
Okay. Right now, China is the guy who has the cash. And it's the person who has the cash who can invest. At different times in the world's history, there were different countries which were in the forefront of investment. At one time it was the US, another time it was Great Britain, another time it was Germany, it was Japan. Now it is China's turn. We see China all over the world. They are not only investing in Sri Lanka. Sometimes we look at China and say, look, they are coming and investing a great deal of money here. Well, that is true. But do you know that when they have invested about $10 billion in Sri Lanka at different projects, they have invested $1.6 trillion in the US. No other country than the US. So different countries at different times in history invest all over. US doesn't say anything about the money that is invested there. China went to Great Britain, and the Queen set out the horse carriage for the Chinese president to welcome him, and they pledged for $2 billion into the US, into UK. So different times we get different countries investing, and China has invested in Sri Lanka. They have come in the form of loans, which many of those loans are highly concessional and with long gestation periods. And their technology also has been useful for our country, particularly the construction of the power plants in Norachole, the port in Hambantota, the airport. So those have been very useful projects for Sri Lanka. So I think we need to welcome that. And if we get that kind of projects, we should welcome. And it's not that we are shunning away any other investment. Actually, when you really look at the soft investments, like in treasury bills and treasury bonds, in international sovereign bonds, the US is even higher. People don't see that as an investment because that money is in the form of treasury bills, treasury bonds. Some part of the money is in the form of international sovereign bonds. Those are also large sums of money coming from the US, private investment, or coming from Europe as private investment. But we don't see it. So I think China is a very useful ally and a very useful partner to have. And China is now investing all over the world. We need to welcome them. We need to ensure that we work closely with them. We need to also ensure that we don't work with them in such a way that there's suspicion created in other countries.
Yes, suspicion. That's exactly the word.
Yeah.
So along those lines, how do you do the balancing act, as it were, between the US and India?
It's a delicate balancing act. I think that's why we need to have a very good foreign relations sector, where we talk to people, we explain the situation, we explain what we are doing so that no country gets excited about what we are doing. When we do a port, well, we must also tell the others, this is what we are doing, this is the type of activity that we are going to do there, and we want your support also. And sometimes we need to balance some of these investments. We need to balance, and if somebody is having some particular concern, we need to tell them, look, we would invite you as well. We would want you also to take up a position in that country, in our country. And if we have that kind of engagement, and I think what is important is engagement and a balance. If we have that engagement, we have a good outward-looking policy where we talk to people, we talk to countries, we explain what we are doing, we listen to them, and we are able to engage with them closely. You would find that we can remove some of these suspicions, because suspicions can grow. It's like in any relationship. Suspicions grow if you don't have a very good relationship up front. So Sri Lanka needs to do that. I think we didn't do that well enough. We have to admit. We didn't do that well enough. As a result, some countries became a little suspicious. We need to ensure that in the next time round, that we deal with these countries in an open way, take them into confidence, explain to them what we are doing. And if we do that well, I think we'll have a relationship which ensures that we have good investment as well as good relationships and friendships with all the countries. And that's what we need to aspire for. The US is important to us. India is very important to us. China is. Pakistan, our neighbors are important. Our trading partners like Europe is very important to us. So if we work with them closely and have a balanced engagement, I think we'll do well, and we need to strive to do that.
Now let's make a turn to our the topic that we started with, the shock treatment, the benign shock treatment. 12 points included, and you say all of them are necessary to actually revive Sri Lanka's economy. Please elaborate on those 12 points.
Depending on the time, but I'll give you some of the key ones.
Yeah, we are time limited. We only have 3 minutes.
Okay. 12 points, 3 minutes. Okay, go ahead. Let's go. First of all, we need to get our overall tax rates down. People must feel comfortable about their taxes. They shouldn't feel inhibited by taxes. We need to bring that down. We need to bring the interest rates down. Now, these are all 15-minute topics each, but I'm telling you very quickly. Third, we need to get our rupee to shrink further. It's far too depreciated right now. We need to keep it stable, but we need to have it appreciated because our debt cannot ever be managed at the current rates. Number 4, we need to ensure that the banks are stable and that the finance companies are stable, because unless the financial sector is strong, we won't be able to have a strong economic sector. We need to ensure that those are supported wherever they need to be, and there is a liquidity fund at the central bank where we need to allocate a certain amount of money in order to ensure that that is also done. Number 5, we've got to ensure that the businesses that have suffered over the last 5 years by having a downturn economy, that those are supported to come out of the crib, to come out of the debt traps that they are in, to be restructured. And for that, we'll need to also give them a little bit of money and to hold their hand until they come out of that situation. We need to rebrand Sri Lanka. We need to ensure that Sri Lanka is not this debt-trapped, coming out of the war, house-made country, that we are a more progressive nation. We need to do that in a way that people will want to do business with us and start working with us. We need to ensure that our relationships with the rest of the world, where there have been some blunders made by the current government, are brought back, particularly the agreements that we have had with countries which are detrimental to Sri Lanka. We need to abrogate those, or not abrogate, we need to renegotiate those. We need to also ensure that the agreements like what we have with the Hambantota port are revisited to see that we bring back some initiative back to Sri Lanka.
Awfully sorry to interject, but do you think, realistically, do you think that it's possible?
Of course.
To renegotiate?
Of course. It's possible. We need to do it. Then we need to get our rural economy going. To get the rural economy going, we got to ensure that the people who are presently considered to be poor, like those who are in the who are having Samurdhi benefits, are given some big shock, a benign shock. That is, by giving them a part of the money that are in their credit, to their credit, released to them, so that they can pay off the loans that they have, that they will be able to build a well if they need to, or build a room that they need to, or get rid of their loans that they have had to pay off to the loan sharks, so they get revitalized again.
Unfortunately, we will have to stop there, and it is a riveting discussion, and unfortunately we are time limited. So big thank you for for coming on the show today, and that brings a close to another episode of Hydepark. Do join us again next week with your regular host, Ineffciencies. Good night.